Hi folks, it's Mike here with a tutorial of the Korg MS2000 Mod Sequencer. While there are many excellent YouTube videos covering this topic, I still struggle to understand some of the basic things about the Mod Sequencer and how to use it. And that's the focus of today's video. So if you're following along with me on your own synthesizer, I'll walk you through the settings so we're all on the same page. So let's just start over here by turning the synthesizer on. Do that. You'll see the display says MS2000BR. It'll come up in this mode. It's in program mode right now. So what I'll do is I'll select the init patch by going to bank H and then button 16, so H and init. Next I'm going to go over to the global parameters and make sure that the clock is set to internal. So I'll go clock and then I'll go up on the pages here until I get to MIDI. And then we'll cursor over until we get to here, clock, and it's set to external, so I'll hit this button and change it to internal. Next we'll go to the arpeggiator, and to get to that we need to go to edit mode, get out of program mode, go down to arpeggio here, button number 15, and make sure that key sync is turned on, and that's 25E, so, oops, sorry, B, C, D, E, arpeggiator key sync, turn that on. And also the next page, resolution, let's change that to 1/4 notes, which is slower, so I gotta go slower, 1/4. And now let's go over to the Mod Sequencer by pressing the sequence button here, number 11. And parameter A is the last step, which is set to 16. We'll leave it at 16 for now. Then we'll go here and make sure that's in the forward mode. We're going to change it from loop mode into one-shot mode. And we're going to go over to timbre key sync and make sure it's in timbre. And finally to resolution and make sure it's also set to quarter notes so that it's the same as the arpeggiator. Okay, so I'll be using the built-in keyboard on the MS2000BR so you can see what notes I'm actually playing. This is achieved by pressing this button over here, which will then illuminate. And then when I press these buttons, they now become notes. Then you can see N chords. Okay, so to start right off, and probably the biggest point that I didn't get right away when I got the MS2000 is that the Mod Sequencer itself doesn't produce gates and therefore it can't trigger anything. Now I have a lot of synthesizers and quite a few sequencers and all of them do produce gates and trigger things. So this initially caused me a lot of confusion as it was different and I didn't expect that. But it also explains why virtually every video you see of the Mod Sequencer is also using the arpeggiator in conjunction with the Mod Sequencer. Why? Because the arpeggiator does create gates and it does trigger things. To demonstrate this, I'll program the first lane of the sequencer to change the pitch of notes randomly. So let's go to the sequence edit button here, press sequence number 1. The light comes on. Now we're just going to adjust the 16 knobs here to vary pitch. So it's these 16 knobs and I'll just kind of turn them. So now I've turned the 16 knobs and programmed it. As I was turning it, if you noticed in the display, those values were changing as I was turning them. You'll hear the notes changing. And since it's programmed to one shot, it'll stop at the end. Now if I play a different note, it'll transpose the sequence. And if I play multiple notes, chords, you'll see that it's playing all the notes and it's stopping at the end of the 16 steps. Now the only reason I'm hearing all of these notes play is number one, I held the key until all 16 played. If I let go while it's playing the 16 steps, it'll stop when I let go. And the other reason that I heard the notes is because the envelope generator number 2 on the default patch, the sustain level is set to 10. So those two things had to happen, otherwise I wouldn't have heard all the notes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the sustain down to 0. And now when I play a note on the keyboard, what's going to happen? I hear the beginning of a note. I see the lights blinking, but I'm not hearing any other notes. Let's do it again. Hear the beginning, but nothing else. Play a chord. Hear the beginning, but nothing else, even though I'm holding it. So initially I found that to be very confusing. So since the mod sequencer is not producing gates as it moves along, it is not triggering EG2. Only the keyboard is triggering EG2. So when I press the key here, I trigger EG2 because of the keyboard, not because of the sequencer. So to hear the difference now, I'm going to adjust the decay time for EG2 and increase it to about 3/4 of the way up. So I'm going to go to this knob, and it goes from 0 up to 127. I'll put it about there, about 106 or so. It doesn't really matter. And now I'm going to see what happens when I hold a key down. So I hear more of the notes, but still not all of them. So I'll increase it again a little bit. I'm hearing more notes, but they're getting quieter and quieter because envelope generator 2 is decaying, but slowly. Okay, so the main takeaway from this discussion is that the mod sequencer is exactly what it says it is. It's a modulation source. So if you think of it the same way you would an LFO or an envelope generator, it will make more sense to you. It does not produce gates and it doesn't trigger things. Okay, so the next thing I want to touch on is, well, what is it that the mod sequencer can actually control? So it turns out that the mod sequencer is the most versatile modulation source in the MS2000 because of the large number of destinations it can control. Now, while the manual refers to a few of these, the majority are not even discussed and they're referred to as other. When people think of a sequencer, they mainly think about pitch of notes, and that is one of the modulation targets of the mod sequencer. In addition to pitch, though, we can also modulate stage length and all of the following knobs. On oscillator 1, control 2. On oscillator 2, semitone and tone. On the mixer, oscillator 1, oscillator 2, and noise. On the filter, cutoff, resonance, EG1 intensity, and keyboard track. On the amp, its level and its pan. We can control this knob, portamento. Then we can control all these knobs' primary function, which is EG1's attack, decay, sustain, release. EG2, attack, decay, sustain, release. LFO1's frequency, LFO2's frequency, the effect, speed, time, and depth feedback, and the intensity of the 4 virtual patch panels. So that's the most comprehensive controller that we actually have in this synthesizer is the mod sequencer. And since there's 3 lanes in the sequencer, 1, 2, and 3, which can act simultaneously, it means that you can control 3 of those targets at the same time. Next point I'll make is that the mod sequencer is a relative control, not an absolute one. So since it is a relative control, it's acting in addition to any other things that are controlling the same target. So if the target is pitch, it will modulate the pitch relative to the keyboard input. This allows pitch sequences to be transposed automatically by just playing a different key on the keyboard. So you can see that I'm transposing as I play different keys, which makes the mod sequencer a relative control. Not all sequencers work that way, but many of them do. Now I'm going to talk about using the mod sequencer with the arpeggiator. In the beginning I mentioned that many tutorials actually do this. So to do this, we're first of all going to change the run mode of the mod sequencer from the one-shot mode that it's in into the looping mode. So you're going to make sure we're in edit mode. Turn off the keyboard for a second and go down to the sequencer button, the 11th one here. And we'll just page forward until we see run mode. It's one shot. Let's turn it into loop. Okay, and now with the arpeggiator and mod sequencer both at the same resolution of a quarter note, we will get a gate from the arpeggiator every step of the mod sequencer. Now the gate control of the arpeggiator will actually affect the synth sound. So let me turn on the arpeggiator here by hitting the on button. Turn the keyboard back on. Now when I hit a button, since the mod sequencer and the arpeggiator are on, this is what we'll hear. And it's looping. And now the gate control on the arpeggiator makes a difference. And again, the reason why is the arpeggiator is triggering the envelope generators, even though the mod sequencer is not. But because the two of them are at the same resolution, we're getting a gate every step of the mod sequencer. However, playing more than one note or changing the octave range on the arpeggiator will start to change the sequence, creating what are called polyrhythms. I'll play a two-note chord and notice the different sequence that it creates. Versus so now I'm getting different sequences depending on which two notes I actually play, because it is a relative control. Now I'm going to play a three-note chord, and you'll see it gets different again. So what's happening here is at each step, while the mod sequencer is moving forward, the arpeggiator is also arpeggiating those three notes that I was holding down, which ended up creating a different sequence every time I changed what those key combinations were. So those are called polyrhythms, and it's something that's a lot of fun to play around with. I'm not going to go into any more detailed discussion. If you want more detail, please feel free to go and see one of my other videos on the channel called Korg SQ1 Sequences Longer Than 16 Notes, where I demonstrate polyrhythms quite a lot. To make things even more interesting, the mod sequencer key sync mode will further change the result. First, let's turn off the arpeggiator temporarily. Now I'm going to play a chord on the keyboard, which is going to result in the chord being transposed to the mod sequencer as we would expect. Okay, so if I play one note, you get obviously one. And as I add more, they just get added and they stay in time, as you might expect. All right, but now I'm going to change the key sync mode to voice from timbre, and then we're going to get a very different result. So what I need to do is go to the sequencer and change from timbre to voice. And now when I play a note on the keyboard, sounds the same as before. If I play three notes starting all at the same time, it sounds the same as before. So you might say nothing changed, but I'll play these same three notes, but I'm going to bring them in one at a time. And now you'll notice a couple things. There's multiple sets of lights marching across the keyboard here instead of one. So what's happened now is I've got a mod sequence for each note that I'm playing on the keyboard. This is the difference in voice mode versus timbre mode, which does them always all together. So the result was really quite different. All right, so now I'm going to change the mod sequencer back from voice mode to timbre mode, as it was before. So the next thing I'm going to show is the difference between the arpeggiator and the mod sequencer when their resolutions are not set to the same number. Right now we have them both set to a quarter note, but I'm going to change one of them so that I can get more interesting sequences. So first let's try to have the arpeggiator produce 3 gates for every step of the mod sequencer by changing the mod sequencer's resolution to a 3/4 note from what right now is a 1/4 note. So we're going to go over to the mod sequencer and we're going to change the resolution from 1/4, we're going to make it even slower, to 3/4. So there it is, 3/4. And by the way, I'll point out that the mod sequencer has many more resolution choices than the arpeggiator does. And now I'll play a key on the keyboard and we'll hear that we're going to get 3 gates for every step of the mod sequencer. What happens if I play a 3-note chord? What I'm getting now is I'm getting triplets that are transposed by the mod sequencer. So playing chords with more or less notes will again result in polyrhythms. So if I play 2 notes in a chord, so with different combinations, I'm once again getting polyrhythms. But what I'm demonstrating here is that I'm getting 3 gates for every step by changing that resolution. Now let's reverse the situation, have the mod sequencer take 3 steps for every 1 step of the arpeggiator. And we're going to do this by changing the mod sequencer resolution to 1/12 notes, which is 3 times as fast as the quarter note resolution that the arpeggiator is right now set to. So let's go back to the mod sequencer and let's go change its resolution to a faster resolution this time. Just keep going until you find 1/12. There it is. Now when I play a single note, I'll get 3 notes from the mod sequencer for every 1 note and gate from the arpeggiator. Now this effect is very noticeable if the sustain level on EG2 is reduced. Turn the decay up. So I can really change the feel of the sequence by just changing the sustain and decay time. Turn the sustain down, turn the decay up, turn the release up a bit. You're getting accented triplets now. So the next thing we'll look at quickly is the difference between smooth versus step on the mod sequencer. So obviously how the mod sequencer changes values from one step to the next is set by the motion parameter. When sequencing notes on the mod sequencer, we are in the step mode. However, when creating envelopes or LFOs with the mod sequencer, we may prefer to be in the smooth mode. So let's use the mod sequencer to create kind of a custom LFO. So first let's select sequence number 1 and set the knob mode to filter. Right now knob mode is set to pitch. Alright, so there's an example where we would use smooth instead of step because we want that LFO to kind of move smoothly between its values and not just jump around. Okay, the next thing I'll talk about is step length, and this is definitely one of the more confusing choices for the mod sequencer. The step length can be set from -6 to +6. However, how this actually relates to time is never really explained in the manual. So through experimentation, I've determined the following. So if we reference the table in the manual that's entitled how resolution and sync note values correspond to note values, the step length parameter simply moves you up or down rows in that table. For example, and I've reproduced a little table here you can look at. This is the Mod Sequencer resolution listed on the left. And for a case where resolution is set to 1/4 note here, and the step length is set to 0, you'll get 1/4 note resolutions. We then set step to -1. You move one row up the table to 3/16 notes. The step length of +3 moves us down the table to half notes. So +3 is here, and you can see half note. -1 is there, 3/16 notes. So for different resolutions, that table, you're just going to shift up and down rows in that table based on what that step length parameter is actually set to. So as an example, let's create a sequence with 1/4 note resolution, where the first note is extended to be a half note, with the remaining notes all 1/4 notes. Okay, so first thing we'll have to do is change Sequencer 1's knob. Go to Sequence 1, and we'll change the knob mode to pitch. Right now it's set to cutoff, so we need to come back down on that parameter to pitch. We'll change the motion parameter back from smooth back to step, because we're going to do notes. And we'll change the last step to step 7. Change the last step from step 4 to step 7. There we go. And make sure that our resolution is now set back to 1/4 note, because we had changed it. So 12th note is faster than a 1/4 note, so we need to slow down. There it is at a 1/4 note. And let me turn my filter, open it all the way back up, because we had turned it down. Since we're using the SQ1 for notes, we need to add a second lane by pressing the sequence edit button until the second light comes on, right here. And for the knob parameter, let's choose step length. Right now it's set at cutoff, and we need to change that to step length, and that's one of the first ones. There you go, step length. So we're going to set the step length for this first step to +3 and all the other ones to 0. Go back to sequence number 1, and then we're going to put in some specific notes here in this case. Let me turn off the arpeggiator for a moment. If I let this run for a while, you may notice that what the sequence actually is the opening sequence in I, Robot by Alan Parsons. Okay, that's all I'm going to cover this time. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them. And again, thanks for watching.